Introducing first, fighting out of the corner, a mixed martial artist holding the professional record, 31 wins, 7 losses. He stands 62 inches tall, weighing in at 205 and 1/2 pounds. Fighting out of Danbury, Connecticut, by way of Sobralia, Minister Rice, presenting Glover.
My man Glover, you are an inspiration to so many people. To the people in Brazil, to the people in Danbury, Connecticut, if you had a message to share as now the UFC light heavyweight champion, what would that be?
Never give up on your dreams. No matter what people say, don't listen to them. They're gonna put you down. Don't listen to those negative people. Believe in yourself, keep going forward.
In the ultimate underdog story, 7 whole years after his UFC title shot against Jon Jones, Glover Teixeira came out and shocked the world in the main event of UFC 267, beating his 4th current or former UFC champion and completing what had been a lifelong journey and an epic, literal rags to riches story that I will highlight in detail in this video. The mild-mannered Brazilian was nothing but pleasant and respectful with his opponent, the now former light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz, during 267 fight week, and even in the fight itself. Jan, who won the belt after longtime title holder Jon Jones released it in August of last year, extended an equal amount of respect and admiration for his foe, and was coming off of his first title defense against middleweight title holder and failed double champion Israel Adesanya. It was Jan that struck first with his thudding leg kicks and crisp jabs. About 30 or 40 seconds into the fight, Glover was able to back Jan to the fence, shoot for a high crotch, and take him down. Jan was able to keep Glover in his closed guard and keep him from passing for the entirety of the round, as was obviously his game plan. Definitely Glover's round though, as he scored some good damage on the ground. During the second round, Glover faced a bit of adversity, as Jan was able to again land that fast, hard jab and connect with some combinations. It was clear Jan wanted no parts of going to the ground. Glover, however, used the same combination that he had used the whole fight, his whole career. Nothing too fancy, a straight right to a left hook and back Jan up to the cage. A clear turning point in the fight was when during an exchange, Glover was able to land a flush left hook on Jan, which stumbled him. Glover was able to perfectly time the takedown with Jan's punches once his back was against the cage and work for the takedown. From there, it was only a matter of time until Glover was able to move to full mount, get Jan's back, flatten him out, and sink in the rear naked choke for a finish. A complete display of dominance. He had done it. At 42 years old, my guy old man Glover, with his back against the wall in terms of realizing his UFC title shot dream, had ascended to the highest mountaintop and performed under the highest of pressures against all odds, becoming the oldest fighter in the UFC to capture a title for the first time, immortalizing the once former illegal immigrant, now turned US citizen, into a select group of elite fighters and completing one of the best comeback stories of all time. What a journey. Not bad for a kid that just didn't want to play soccer like everyone else. I liked America from the first day I got here. I got here in March and it was very cold, and it snowed the first week I was here, but everything was amazing. I never saw snow before. For much of this next part, I will be pulling direct quotes from Glover's interview from October of 2021 on MMA Fighting's Portuguese-language podcast, Trocação, Franca. Article written and transcribed by Gilherme Cruz, unless specifically stated otherwise. This podcast contains some of the most vivid details from Glover's early adulthood that I could find while researching for this video. Glover was born and raised in Sobralia of Minas Gerais state in Brazil. He grew up on a farm in an area of Brazil that was infamous for the mass amount of folks who try to come to the US from there. Especially in 1999, it was extremely hard to get a visa being from his hometown. Now it's a little bit better, but Sobralia still only has less than 6,000 people living there, according to a 2010 census. This is an area that, while Glover was growing up there, it didn't even have a single traffic light. And to this day, it still doesn't even have a single traffic light. And most of the homes that he lived in growing up had no electricity. The people there don't have a lot of things, money, or opportunities to make a substantial amount of money to adequately provide for their families there. One of the things that Glover talks about consistently throughout all interviews was how instead of being interested in soccer, like many of the kids his age in the region, hell, smack dab in the middle of his hometown, there's one big soccer field for everyone. See, look here. But rather, Glover enjoyed the viciousness and the training of boxing thanks to watching Mike Tyson as a kid starting at around the age of 13 years old. Though he didn't know it at the time, as he wouldn't train till years later, Glover's passion for boxing, for Mike Tyson and that killer instinct, would inspire something else so great. At 19 years old, Teixeira decided he wanted something more with his life, to find work, and decided to follow in his cousin's footsteps, who had made the trip about 5 years earlier, and make the 40-some-odd day-long, treacherous journey to the United States. This journey was no joke, as hundreds of people die every year trying to cross the United States southern border, as experts coyotes are paid what little money these folks have in order to guide them across the border in a desert. But seeing as many of the community members who had left return years later with lots of money, Teixeira figured it was worth the risk. Apparently, Glover was even offered to carry a book bag, whose contents were unknown, across the border in exchange for not having to pay coyotes. I don't know what they were asking us to deliver. I think it was drugs or a weapon. I don't know. I didn't even see it. I just said I wouldn't take it. That was not part of the deal. The deal was taking me to the US to work. I never said about taking anything to anyone. Though he declined, it gives you an idea of the guys that Glover was running with during this time if you're unfamiliar with border crossings. Teixeira left his mother, who was rightfully worried sick, and the rest of his family, taking a bus with 12 others from his home in Sobralia to Rio de Janeiro, and stayed in the city for a week to get his passport. Then he boarded a flight to Bogota, Colombia. From there, he started to journey through South America and Central American countries, making his way north, before making it to Tijuana, Mexico, where they stayed for 8 days waiting for the perfect opportunity to cross the border into the US. Teixeira recalled on MMA Fighting's Portuguese-language podcast, Trocação, Franca, that I stayed in Tijuana for 8 days, waiting for the fog to come so the helicopter and immigration people wouldn't see us. We had to wait for a strong fog to cross the desert at night. Glover and the group eventually crossed the border without incident in about 4 or 5 hours. The final step to Teixeira's harrowing journey was waiting in a house in San Diego for 12 days. Glover and his companions were kept in the house until their guide could pay back the coyotes their money for leading them across the border, and these guys were playing absolutely no games. As Glover recounted, "We had to stay in this house in San Diego for 12 days, waiting for the guide to pay the coyotes. They didn't let us leave before they got paid. We only ate once a day, a slice of bread with beans. I lost 26 pounds. They had guns and everything, waiting for the money." However, once the guide finally came back and paid up, Teixeira jetted out of there. Literally. And took a commercial flight to Boston, and from there, left for Danbury, Connecticut, where he still lives and has opened his own gym today. Why Danbury, Connecticut, you might ask? Well, because Glover knew guys there, and there are lots of landscaping jobs, especially in the summer. This part of Glover's journey is the part that more than a few people have been on, but the part that followed, well, that was what set Glover apart and what set him on his path towards winning UFC gold. I thought it was very interesting that the quote that I showed y'all first, the one that was in the Conneticut magazine, where Teixeira says he loved America from the first day he got here and he'd never seen snow. Well, almost 8 years after that interview, Glover repeated pretty much the exact same statement, showing how sincere he really was in that first interview, but also adding a little context to it, saying that he fell in love with the country on the first day he got here, but this time added it was as soon as he learned that he could be paid $10 an hour to shovel snow from sidewalks. Imagine that. Just overjoyed, giddy at the ability to so easily make such good money for a low-skilled job, the very same job that many adult American citizens would turn their nose up at. Teixeira happily worked in manual labor, predominantly in the landscaping industry, where it's not uncommon to work 10 or even 12-hour days in hot weather. But once Glover had earned a good amount of money, he enlisted at a local boxing gym, as Glover now wanted to pursue boxing like the great Mike Tyson. And just mere days later, a friend approached Glover and unknowingly had him sign up for a tough man contest. Glover describes how, even though he didn't win the tournament, he beat up a couple of cans, his words not mine, and got his face absolutely smashed in the semifinal, but won. Though Teixeira ultimately lost the final of the tournament in pretty ugly fashion. Though Glover was admittedly crushed by the result, he returned to the boxing gym to intensify his training, as that's just how this man is built, and those performances made him want to return and win that tough man tournament. However, again, his friend stepped in. What a guy, huh? What a friend. Who was baffled that a man from Brazil was interested in boxing instead of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and tried to convince him to pursue fighting in the UFC. Glover's friend went to good old Blockbuster, rip Blockbuster, pour one out, and rented a tape with UFC 1, 2, and 3 on it. Glover watched it and was immediately dead set and hooked on making it to the UFC and began training MMA with a purpose in December of 2001. After just 6 months of training with an 180-pound purple belt from Danbury, Glover made his pro debut in 2002 at WEC 3 against Erik Schwartz. In his first professional fight, Glover was soundly defeated, but held his own in the first round, going toe-to-toe with his much more adequately trained adversary before gassing in the second. But this fight was not a total loss. In fact, it would lay the foundations for the winning blueprint that would win Glover a UFC title nearly 2 whole decades later. Glover had attracted the attention of his opponent's coach, John Hackleman, for his ultra-gutsy performance, as Hackleman had never seen someone endure the amount of punishment that Glover had against Schwartz and just keep moving forward. Teixeira just kept coming at him, even when getting beat up. It seems that Glover had adopted a fight style that would emulate his attitude in life, never quitting, always moving forward. And as we can see now, that would truly pay dividends in the long run. Who is Mr. Hackleman, some of you might ask? Well, I'm sure not too many of you are probably asking, but I'll explain anyways. In 1986, John Hackleman founded a little MMA gym named The Pit at his home in Woodland Hills, California. Hackleman had been training since 1970 and simply wanted to pass down some knowledge and have fun with some local buddies. Even though it really wasn't anything huge in the beginning, with it literally being in Hackleman's backyard, little did he know what it would become. Many prestigious fighters have trained at his hardcore Kaju Kempo or Hawaiian Kempo, a style that blends Kempo karate, judo, jiu-jitsu, boxing, and wrestling together, style MMA gym, including Tito Ortiz, Tim Kennedy, Jake Shields, and the fighter that put them on the map, a bouncer with a knack for accounting, the future UFC champion, Chuck Liddell. John Hackleman is a legend in the sport, and fortunately for this story, took Glover right under his wing after his debut. It was at around the same time of when he was training and recovering after his first pro fight that Glover met his wife Ingrid Peterson at the gym in Conneticut. They married after just 2 years of dating and are still married to this day. But anyways, despite starting his pro career at 2-2, Teixeira amassed a 7-2 record between his 0-2 debut in March of 2008. Fighting in specific places in California and Oregon, as he could not fight anywhere but on Native American reservations. Teixeira's official coming out party, if you will, was his 2006 fight with then 4-2 Sokoju on WEC 42, which was headlined by Nate Diaz vs Hermes Franca, where Teixeira smoked his African competitor in under 2 minutes of the first round. Dana White was in attendance for the fight, and man did this fight age like fine wine, ultimately gaining Teixeira quite a bit of clout. Sokoju would go on to beat the legend Minotauro Nogueira, the future training partner / coach of Teixeira, in 23 seconds at Pride 33 in his very next fight. And in the following fight, beat Ricardo Arona, who is a Pride legend with a crazy resume, having beat Dan Henderson, Wanderlei Silva, as well as having finished Sakuraba and Overeem. With those fight outcomes, Glover was firmly solidified as one of the top talents outside of the UFC at that moment in time. And thanks in part to Glover's close connection to Chuck Liddell as a trusted primary training partner, coupled with his amazing fighting skills, tenacity, and absolute hunger to improve in the gym each and every day, Glover was heavily on the radar of the UFC. Chuck was even in Dana's ear hyping Glover up, talking about how he could KO Michael Bisping in under 2 rounds. Keep in mind that Liddell had known Dana prior to Dana even being involved in the UFC, so obviously Dana would respect his opinion a little more than the average cat. Of course, coupled with the fact that he is Chuck Liddell. Every hardcore MMA fan from here to Kingdom Come was interested in getting Glover Teixeira a UFC fight. Eventually, UFC President Dana White personally approached Glover to inquire about signing him to the UFC. However, because Glover wasn't a US citizen, but instead an illegal immigrant at this time, he was forced to fight exclusively on Native American tribal lands and reservations, where laws aren't enforced the same because it is technically not American soil, as well as being restricted from being able to leave the country for fear of not being able to return. Because of this, Glover missed out on a lot of big name organizations and opportunities such as Pride and of course the UFC, but even smaller promotions like Elite XC, who had actual contracts on the table that offered him a good amount of money, like $15K to show, $15K to win. After UFC 267, Glover even detailed how he had tried out for the Ultimate Fighter 1 and did amazing in every phase of the tryouts, but couldn't get on the show simply because of his green card status. Later in 2014, Glover would give insight to the Boston Herald on his frustrating journey and intentions when he first came to America and how he overstayed his welcome. When I come to the United States, I came here illegally. I didn't know I was going to be a fighter. I just thought I was going to work landscaping for, 3-4 years, then go back to Brazil and live my life. But back then, I didn't want to go through papers. Like, I don't need papers right now. The green card. But after 2001, on September 11th, they had all the laws changed, so I had to go to Brazil to fix my situation. That's why I ended up waiting so long over there, because I was illegal here for so long. And Glover isn't lying here, or exaggerating. Ask anyone in America over 25 years old. Starting on September the 12th, 2001, the entire country was on lockdown. Everyone's mindset had changed, and without a doubt, that time and the years that followed were some of the worst times to be an immigrant of any kind within the country's borders. Instead of continuing to keep his options so narrowed, Glover looked over his options with a lawyer and decided his best course of action was to return to Brazil, write a letter of forgiveness to the US government, and hope to be granted a visa. Glover even got Dana's word, sealed with a handshake, that if he went back and got his papers to become legit and came back, that he would be granted a UFC contract. So off Teixeira went to see his mother and the rest of his family for the first time in nearly 10 years and to try to right a wrong. What followed was anything but what Glover had expected, especially during his first year back in Brazil. Teixeira details his visa being denied the first time and just being crushed, crying, being confused and not knowing what to do, being afraid that a dumb mistake he had made as a kid, simply trying to pursue a better life, would cost him his dream of getting to fight for a large MMA promotion. Glover was training with some of the top guys in the world and holding his own against the likes of Junior Dos Santos, Lyoto Machida, and Chuck Liddell, just to name a few, and yet was unable to get to the US to fight real competition. This is the time period where Glover began to question if this dream, was ever going to happen, if MMA was the sport for him, or if he should just pack it up and head back to his hometown. This was the lowest time of Glover Teixeira's life. And as an incredibly positive man, an incredibly strong man, it very nearly brought him to his knees.
To be honest, everything that happens in my life, that's the hardest thing. That's the hardest part of my life was there in Brazil. Because, coming over here, like I say, I was 18, 19 years old. I didn't care, man. I was just having fun. Yeah. And then come over here working. I didn't care, like, all right, I'm just going to go back to Brazil. Make some money here, go back to Brazil, live my life as a cowboy there. But when I went back to Brazil, and I struggled so much that I was like, man, maybe this is not what I meant to do, fighting, because and this is me training with, I train with Junior Dos Santos, I train with Lyoto, I was training with top contender, top fighters, and before I trained with Chuck Liddell, right. So I knew how good I was, I'm not talking about, not beating them, but I was doing toe-to-toe with those guys, the champions. And I was like, well, maybe it's not meant to be, it's get to a point that, I win Abu Dhabi in Brazil, and that was, the point that I thought, hey, maybe I stop with this, go back to my hometown.
But thankfully, Glover's boys came through for him, with Chuck Liddell and Coach Pedro Rizzo encouraging Glover, telling him that it doesn't matter if he can get high-level competition, just to fight everyone, beat everyone, become undeniable. So that's exactly what the Brazilian would do. In the 3.5 years that Glover was stuck in Brazil, he went on a 10-fight win streak. And that's being generous, as Glover didn't fight for his first year back in the country, and really he went on this impressive win streak in just over 2 years. The competition just was not on his level, as Glover finished 9 out of his 10 opponents during this time, including an incredible streak in 2011 that saw him finishing UFC veterans Marcio Cruz, Antonio Mendez, and Marvin Eastman in just a 37-day period. A couple months later, Glover finished former UFC heavyweight champion Rico Rodriguez in just under 2 minutes by TKO. Light heavyweight or heavyweight, it didn't matter. Teixeira was waxing all comers, pretty much non-stop. Glover was absolutely going off down south, and many folks say that this was actually Glover's athletic prime and potentially the fighting prime of his entire career. Coincidentally, it was not until his wife, Ingrid, wrote a letter asking Chris Murphy, a junior senator for Connecticut, to help with the situation. Murphy immediately handled the situation, inviting Glover to return to the consulate, and 3 days later, his passport came back with a visa. It would actually take Glover Teixeira until the year 2020 to fully become a US citizen, and by that time, Teixeira was a 40-year-old man, but it still meant just as much, if not more, to finally become a citizen to the country that had provided him with so many opportunities. Glover Teixeira was happily reunited with his wife and coach and went right back to training with the pitmaster, Hackleman. Teixeira entered the UFC in 2012 at 32 years old, shortly after returning to the United States.
Glover Teixeira steps onto the big stage tonight as he makes his UFC debut against Kyle Kingsbury.
In a monumental moment, Glover would not falter, dispatching then 11-3 Kyle Kingsbury in just under 2 minutes of the first round with an arm triangle choke. Glover would go on to win another 4 fights in a row over about an 11-month span, but of course not without a few real gut checks and showing off his toughness. Teixeira beat then 18-5 Fabio Maldonado, but was severely hurt at the end of the first round and had to recompose himself in the corner and finish his opponent, delivering a hellacious beating in the second that forced the doctor to stop the fight after the round had ended. Teixeira defeated former UFC light heavyweight champion Quentin Rampage Jackson by unanimous decision in the fight that followed. Then, Glover finished 16-5 fighter James Tahuna midway through the first by guillotine choke and got to do this in front of his idol, Mike Tyson, the man that had inspired Glover, whose highlights he had watched before so many fights, who had inspired his kill, 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 go for the finish attitude, was there to watch him. Tough Season 8 winner Ryan Bader dropped and hurt Teixeira midway through the first round before Glover was able to come back while hurt and drop Bader with a 1-2 before finishing him off in the first round. Notably, this was also the first time Glover noticed that he was overtraining, coming into the fight way too fatigued and struggling to sleep. Glover Teixeira, coming off of 2 Fight of the Night bonus winning performances, 5 straight UFC wins, and riding a 20-fight win streak, was finally in the front of the line to challenge for the UFC light heavyweight title. The man standing in his way? The Boogeyman, who at that point had been UFC champion for 3 years, had 6 title defenses, 26-year-old Jon Jones. Entering the fight, Jones was most recently coming off of the first Gustafsson fight and feeling the pressure of a lot of fans questioning whether or not he was truly great, so he was especially looking to put on an excellent fight. A rather, tired, I guess, if that's what you want to believe, Jon Jones spoke with Ariel Helwani before UFC 172 to say he had every intention of taking out the Brazilian before the conclusion of 5 rounds.
Give us the official prediction. How does it end?
This Saturday night, I'm going to go out there and just try to do something that's never happened before. That's just be myself against Glover Teixeira. Just be faster, and alert, aware, unpredictable. I'm planning on just dominating him. The plan is to finish the fight.
One of the major story points in the lead up to this fight was Jon Jones requesting the UFC to have Glover Teixeira be randomly drug tested. Glover, of course, was completely unfazed by this request, as he insisted he had absolutely nothing to hide and actually suggested that the UFC test way more guys.
Actually good for the sport. I hope they do that more. And I have nothing. People ask me all the time if I'm pissed about that. I'm not, because I have nothing to hide. So it's not like bothering me or anything. But I wish they do that for all fighters, man. That'd be good, For me, for guys that doesn't do anything, so that'd be good. They test everybody else, because at least I know nobody else is using stuff,
I thought this was an interesting tidbit that I had forgot about here, as USADA, the UFC's very stringent drug test agency, was implemented about 2 years after this fight. And guess what happened that very same year? Jones popped for a drug test in competition. Jon Jones laid a heavy beating on Glover Teixeira, beating him at his own game. As opposed to utilizing his 8.5-inch reach advantage, Jones dirty boxed with Glover and took him down. Though he was unable to get the finish, Jon Jones was landing brutal elbows at will on Glover and knocked out his mouthpiece not 1 or 2, but 3 times. Jones also injured Teixeira's shoulder when he got the overhook and violently wrenched Glover's arm in a move few had seen at the time in the UFC. During his fighting prime at 34 years old, as opposed to a roadblock, Teixeira was little more than a speed bump that Jones rolled right over during his biggest moment, handing him his first professional loss since 2005 and snapping his 20-fight win streak. However, Glover never gave up on himself. Even at the very end of the fight, it was easy to tell just watching that he was giving all he could, even when his cardio began to fail him and losing every round. In the UFC 172 post-fight press conference, even Jon Jones had to commend the amount of effort that his opponent had given that night.
Yeah, hats off to Glover. He definitely fought his heart out, and to the last second. I think his cardio may have given up on him a little bit. And he told me backstage, his rib was hurt on his left side and his right arm was hurt from an elbow crank I had did. So the fact that he kept fighting through all the injuries that he had gotten in that fight, and the blood in his eye, that guy is a straight beast, man. He has the heart of a champion for sure, and the personality too, man. He's just such a great person. I respect him so much, and I'm glad to have fought him.
There were 3 separate bad eye pokes in the fight, and Glover sustained a torn labrum as a result of Jones's overhook wrench and had a terrible cut on his eyebrow. But he had earned the respect of lots of casual MMA fans and Bones too. After the Jon Jones fight, Glover lost to Phil Davis and then had a 3-fight finishing streak against OSP, who had the Brazilian hurt very badly in the first round, before Teixeira was able to submit him in the 3rd round. Patrick Cummins in the 2nd round, and former UFC light heavyweight champion Rashad Evans in the 2nd round. And again finding himself within striking distance of another shot at the UFC light heavyweight title. Glover took the mic after the fight and politely called out the scariest man in the division.
This is 3 big wins in a row for you and moves you to the very top of the heap. You've got Ofgang St. Cruz fighting Jon Jones next weekend, and of course Daniel Cormier waiting in the wings. Give us your thoughts about where you fit in the big picture.
I fit right on the top, Rambo Johnson, he's waiting around for Jones and Cormier soap opera. So he don't want to wait around. Let's dance, baby. Let's make some money.
That sounds like a fantastic fight. Congratulations, sir. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Listen, with a lot of respect for Rambo Johnson, he's a great guy. But like I say, we're here to do business. Let's do business,
I like how you think. Glover Teixeira, ladies and gentlemen.
For the title eliminator bout, one of the most talented KO artists known to man, and at a weight class where he didn't have to almost starve himself to death to be at. And well, Rumble Johnson smoked Glover Teixeira in just 13 seconds in an absolutely devastating loss. For Glover, the next 4 fights were the worst stretch of his pro MMA career, as he struggled to gain traction on his trek back up the mountain to the title shot, going 2-2 and being finished by Alexander Gustafsson in Sweden via an absolutely vicious looking KO in the 5th. But Glover persevered, and at 39 years old, started that mystical 5-fight run that itself had massive amounts of adversity and would ultimately end with Glover Teixeira having the belt wrapped around his waist at the conclusion of the UFC 267 main event. Glover would detail later on an episode of Ariel Helwani's MMA show from May of 2019, smack dab in the middle of this run, how he was so very close to calling it quits during this time period.
Not feel guilty, because I have this app now that measures everything,
Really?
Yeah, called the Omega Wave. You kind of test your body, kind of test every morning before, and if you're, in the red zone or yellow zone, you're close to overtrain, so it's okay to take a day off. I'm getting a shot, and it's working. I love it.
So since you went there last year, you're undefeated, right?
Yeah.
So-
You know, I come from old school, and I still doing old school stuff. I think old school need to be there. That's how fighter become, you know, a fighter. And the old school, the sparring, the wrestling, but just to know your body and know how to train to be a fighter, you know. It was a time, believe me, it was a time that I was doing the camp. Camp was so hard that I wanted to, I even told my wife, I can't wait to, I don't have to do this anymore.
But thanks to the UFC PI and researching on his own to restructure his training, Glover saw less injuries, had more energy, and was able to sleep better. Because as it turns out, Glover's go 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 mentality, never quit, just keep going, was actually hurting him. And for fights like his fight against Jon Jones, and in his rough patch with the promotion, he was likely overtraining. As far back as before his first title shot, in Glover's fight with Bader, he felt like he was overtraining. With this new knowledge and a more wily Glover that was less mindlessly plodding forward into striking range and more moving in and out with explosiveness and utilizing more head movement, he was reinvigorated. Now all he had to do was prove it. I cannot stress this enough. These new training techniques and listening to his body, when to rest, when to take a day off, and straying a little bit from that old school mentality of work as you possibly can, saved this man's career.
But, doing this now is just like so much better, I sleep better, I'm way more happy in camp, I can do this I wish I knew this stuff long time ago. It's just like a couple years ago,
Wow.
like when I fought Gustafsson, I think one of those times, like it just like it was so bad. That camp with Gustafsson was a rough camp. Not nothing. It's just because I was training so much, and when I went to Sweden, the sleeping was bad. It was bad. That's why I was like, oh man, I sleep like 2-3 hours a night.
Wow.
For an athlete, for a guy that's gonna fight in a weekend, you sleep 3 hours is horrible.
Yeah.
And that's why I was like, hey man, this is when I'm pretty close to get done with camps. Camps was stressing me out so much.
Yeah.
But doing this stuff now at PI is just It's changed the game for me.
So is it possible that if there was no PI, you'd be done by now?
Who knows? Depends
Wow.
how those fights go.
Yeah.
First up on that mythical run was Carl Robertson, who at the time was 7-1, a man more than 10 years younger than Glover, who dropped him with an elbow while he was deep in on a shot and had Glover in all types of trouble. But Glover, as he had so many times before, hung tight, waited for his opportunity, and reversed the tide to pull off an arm triangle choke. Then Teixeira pulled off a second round rear naked choke finish against a brash, then 14-3, 25-year-old in Ian Kuntalaba, who was also able to drop the Brazilian in the first round, and was a very tough fight that won the Brazilian a $50,000 bonus for the slick submission. A tough, hard-fought split decision win against the division's dark horse in Nikita Krylov saw Glover in danger of being submitted by a deep rear naked choke. Then Glover pulled off a 5-round thrashing of Anthony Smith, ending in a 5th round ground and pound TKO win for Glover, before capping it off with a 3rd round rear naked choke finish against the former light heavyweight title challenger Thiago Santos, who dropped Glover very early in the first round at the end of the second and absolutely battered him in the third. Glover called for a title shot after his win against Santos.
Dana White, man, come on, man. I'm an old man over here. You're gonna give this shot to Adesanya and make me wait? Come on, man. 5 fights in a row, beating these young guys. It's not easy. Give me that title shot, man. Give me that title shot. But either way, I'm so glad I'll be here. Thank you, Dana. Thank UFC for having me here. And the Rocky Balboa Awards, guys, it's not how hard you can hit. It's how hard you can get hit and keep coming forward.
Though the UFC decided to ultimately have Jan fight Israel Adesanya instead, with Glover as the backup for the fight. If Adesanya would have won, then who knows what would have happened, as he probably would have went back down to 185 pounds immediately to defend the belt, leaving Glover waiting again. But that didn't happen. Jan won, and y'all know how the rest went. Glover Teixeira's post-fight speech and some of these quotes might seem a little cliche, but what makes them not so cliche is looking at the life of the man that is speaking said words. Look at the way that Glover fights. Teixeira illegally made his way into the United States as a teenager, trained and got his shot in a legendary gym off of his heart alone, gained notoriety by his damn self, the hard way, with plenty of bumps, bruises, and missteps along the way. And oh, by the way, wasn't even allowed to compete on US soil except for on Native American tribal lands in small shows. Didn't stress about it though, said okay, I'll do it the right way this time, and voluntarily left the US and went back to Brazil to apply for a visa. Teixeira's career was near stagnant, prime nearly wasted. He wasn't able to live with his wife and was denied entry for 3.5 long years before finally getting his visa and getting to the UFC. But once there, Glover was unstoppable until he wasn't, having his UFC title hopes derailed not once, but twice. But he stayed the course, all the while kept moving forward, stayed positive, and just when the light was fading, at 42 years of age, and with the fat lady warming up in the back behind the curtains, my man Glover got it done, and got it done in stylish fashion. After 7 years between title shots, I'm not sure how much longer Glover will compete, as he said he will listen to his coaches and maybe defend the belt a couple of times, but 2022 could very well be the end. And who knows, maybe a boxing match will be in the future for this man who was inspired by the sport. What an amazing tale of perseverance, stick-to-itiveness, and the power of the human spirit. No way this isn't made into a movie one day. Have a day, UFC light heavyweight champion Glover Teixeira. Hey guys, long time no talk. So this video was straight pain to research because, you know, I'm not a Portuguese speaker, and not only was this information scattered throughout multiple interviews, but it was mostly told from recall. So a lot of stuff varied, but it was so worth it. What a story. That will definitely become a movie or book at some point. There's just too much good stuff in here, but if you made it this far, you know, I really appreciate you so much for watching this. You know, this is my first attempt at a mini documentary, but I've got a Mike Perry video, and when I was researching for this video, it really made me want to make a video on Chuck Liddell and kind of not knowing when to retire, which Glover made some excellent comments on, and I really hope, you know, doesn't happen to the Brazilian. So maybe be on the lookout for that Chuck Liddell video in the future. Please don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more content. Have a good one.